morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the High Dragon's Breath Bow Wow, welcoming you back to another Arkan's Adversaries Luggnum campaign. It is the day of Luggnum's reckoning. This is a two-part video, and here is the part one. So, a recap of our last video. Luggnum, a mining world in the Imperial Glorianum sector in the Calixis segmentum, is our current location. We are traveling to the far north of the Imperium. A couple of things to clear up and go over from last video. I had a little verbal typo during the last video, and I had mentioned that the total population was a little lower than it should be. The total population of the mining world of Luggnum is well over 3 billion people, split roughly evenly between 3 major hive cities. Now, while these are major hive cities, they are considerably less large than the average hive city. They're like light hives, basically. Fairly normal, but they are just a little bit smaller than average, and of course, they have a lot of industry, in this case mining, built within them, so it's not entirely housing, just the lower levels for the most part. The total planetary defenders, however, I have now a much more detailed breakdown for. As again, these are all split into threes. The total defenders of the entirety of Luggnum as a planet equals up to 2.6 million men and women. The defenders include 3,000 Arbites, split evenly between the 3 hive cities, so about 1,000 apiece. 600,000 local police. These are usually equivalent to strike breakers, usually only having limited access to firearms like pistols and the occasional shotgun, but more often than not they will have billy clubs and other self-defense weapons of that type. In addition to this, there are around 2 million PDF troopers on Luggnum, and we will get to know them a little bit better throughout this video, and the one following it mostly. So, that means on our main focus hive, where we started last time, the mushroom hive of Hive Movis, there is the following. 1 above-ground mine and 1 underhive mine. Again, these are both deep penetration lithosphere mines designed to strip out large amounts of metal from deep within the planet's crust. In its population of 1 billion, it includes, as mentioned, 1,000 Arbites, 200,000 local police, and 600,000 planetary defense forces. So, a whole bunch of troopers, a roughly 1/3 the size of them group of local police, and then a small group of Arbites spread out in precinct houses around this mushroom hive. A little reminder for you who don't remember, mushroom hives are designed with multiple small spires that are all housing relatively important things like astropathic choirs, the governor's palace, etc., but they're not built very high off the ground, usually only having 2 or 3 levels above ground, where instead they have a very wide and deep underhive that houses a large part of the population, and the underhive mine as well. Last video we talked about the beginning of a civil uprising on Luggnum, and specifically in Hive Movis. On the evening of the day of the Emperor's Ascension, a food riot has gotten out of hand, leading up to the Spillway 9 massacre, where a bunch of abhumans, rioters, and local gangers were slaughtered by the Arbites after attempting to infiltrate or attack their precinct house. Now, this massacre has caused some problems, and despite continued unrest over the next 2 days after the Emperor's Ascension, things have been relatively normal. Work has continued up until today. On the morning of the 3rd day after the massacre, there is some problems. An interruption in the communication and the disappearance of local police forces at the above-ground mine. This has resulted in a PDF deployment to the above-ground mine shaft that evening. While the curfew on the lower hive, aka the shutting in of the entirety of the underhive, has been lifted, the Arbites have been sent in force to activate a cull within the previous lockdown areas of the hives under Luggnum, and specifically under Hive Movis. While other units within other hives have been activated, Movis is the one that is the center of the problems, and as a result, their PDF and Arbites are now being mobilized to deal more directly with these various problems. That means that the Arbites are going into the underhive to quell any remaining resistance from the civilian population. In the meantime, the PDF are going to seek out the missing police units that had been at the above ground mine shafts, and they are seeking the source in the break of the mine's communication. Essentially, they have had no problems up until this morning. This morning, despite some breakdown in communication, there were supposed to be police on scene at the above ground mine shaft. They haven't come back, and what is more concerning is that since they cannot communicate with the mine, they have no way of telling what happened to those roughly 1,000 or so local officers. So, the PDF have sent a detachment to go deal with it themselves, find out what the problem is, and then on the other side of things, the elite Arbites riot squads have decided that it is time to put down this rebellion and resistance once and for all, and they are going into the underhive, which had been previously closed, and by curfew it literally means shutting down all access to the lower hive, including locking many people in their homes for several days, 2 whole days in this case. So they are coming down to make sure that there will be no further disturbance to the hive's workings. We start off with the underhive reopening. So what is happening during this aforementioned curfew? Essentially, after the Spillway massacre, a curfew was instituted. The underhive doors are completely closed and sealed for a full 48 hours. That also means that many of the hab blocks are remotely closed as well, meaning that some people are stuck within their homes, some are unable to work, others are forced to go down into the underground mine, rather than going up into the above ground mine, which employs quite a few people. Others are trapped without food and resupply. As previously mentioned, the riots had stripped a lot of places of their food. And this is essentially a cooling off period for the underhive, at least it is supposed to be. The Arbites' plan, as it often is to let the people calm down, take some realization of what they've done, the damage that they've done, and what they need to continue survival with the assistance of Hive Movis. And then after that reconciliation period of essentially being under house arrest, the underhive is opened back up, and the Arbites come down to cull the population. Those who are still resistant, even after this period of calming down, can be determined as malcontents, and they will be very much revoked of their imperial right to life, as it were, aka the Arbites are not here to play around. They're rolling in light APCs with shotguns, heavy bolters, and body armor, here to delete anything that still has a pulse and isn't happy to see them. So, what happens? Well, a whole group of Arbites, basically the majority of the 1,000 or so Arbites who are within Hive Movis, are standing outside of the main underhive entrance, a big old gateway like this one, by the time that they are ready to do the cull. And the doors open on an automated schedule after the curfew is ended. And it's quiet. It's remarkably quiet. There's no one out in the streets. There's no one begging for food at the servitors that go to the upper hive. There doesn't seem to be anyone out here right now. And that is odd. 48 hours without food and resupply, you would expect at least a couple of people to be begging the Imperial authorities for assistance. And there's nobody here. The streets are quiet. There's a couple of indications of maybe some scuffling. There's at least one pool of blood sitting in the roadway, but no bodies and no violence. There's not even any angry slogans done up on the wall like "Screw the Imperium" or "To hell with the Arbites." So, what is the Arbites' initial tactics and habits? Well, they're not freaked out by this. The idea of people hiding from them is pretty much what they wanted. They want there to be a period of cooling off, and at the end of that period of cooling off, everybody better be happy to see them, otherwise they're going to receive a 12-gauge shell to the face. So, when they're met by silence, it doesn't initially freak them out all that much, and they go to their standard tactics. They roll the streets and patrol. Now, this patrolling is very much done by a mix of foot and vehicle. There are not a ton of heavy vehicles in the Arbites precinct houses. There's probably about 4 light APCs of various builds. Think of them like 113s or armored cars, things of that nature. But that leaves a full 5 or so squads able to move, and the rest of them basically on foot. They are going to go down every street, scan every alleyway, and keep to main roads in large groups of 5 to 10 so that they can make sure that they're not going to be overwhelmed by anybody. And in this way, they spread out throughout the underhive. Now, the underhive is massive and it's very extensive, which means that they keep very consistent minute to minute radio contacts and communication, in addition to reporting anything that seems amiss or abnormal. And beyond the silence of the doors, things do get a little bit more normal in terms of Arbites policing. The first of the rats, as it were, emerge. And this is where things get stereotypically imperial. The fate of the hungry, the unwary, the naive, and the desperate. Now, 48 hours without light, without food, without recycled water, and with some of their air ducts malfunctioning is going to drive a lot of people into a lot of concern and desperation. Now, the fate of the hungry is pretty explanatory. Those people who come up begging the Arbites for food, asking for help, for permission to leave the underhive, wondering if the curfew is finished, they are directed to return back to their homes and told that services will be resumed within the day. Nowadays, in the early evening when this starts, so a lot of those people are initially resistant to just go back home and trust the Arbites, but a few people dying as a result of their resistance to return home is all that it really takes for the rest of the hungry to leave the Arbites alone and let them do their job. So the first couple of bodies drop. What about the unwary? Well, the unwary are unfortunately those who happen to come across the Arbites by accident, and this is often people who don't realize that they are Arbites squads. They are cut purses or criminals or simply people who are scared and alone in the dark who happen to run into the Arbites and not realize who they are. So they run out and either pull a knife on an Arbite or try and shout at them to get out of their store or to get out of the roadway about a curfew. They receive about a 1-second warning before their heads are blown off. Now again, the Arbites are not here to play. They have absolutely no intention of taking any complaints or of worrying about people's opinion or perception of them. You had 2 days to fix your act up, and you knew damn well what you did wrong. So if you're still here and you're still causing us trouble, you deserve every ounce of this slug that you're going to receive. And a lot of the people who are unwary or naive enough to assume that they can boss around or ask things directly from the Arbites are going to end up in a welter of their own gore on the floor if they're lucky enough to get hit with a shock baton instead of just receiving a bunch of lead downrange. And then finally we have the desperate. Now within any hive, and especially within the underhive, you will get people who are at their very, very wits' end. There are people who are terrified. There are people who don't have access to a lot of different things when we go into a full curfew and lockdown. And these people, they might be panicking quite a bit, and the sight of heavily armed enforcers is not the comfortable or reassuring indication that the horror is over. It's much more accurately an indication that things are about to get a lot worse. Now, a lot of these desperate people are not actually regular humans, but they are abhumans, and they see the Arbites as an immediate and direct threat, both after the Spillway 9 massacre and also after the regular culling that happens within Movis Hive, designed to lower the population of abhumans. So a lot of abhumans who are out and about in the streets, or possibly moving to try and get to work at this evening time, are absolutely shredded by the Arbites, who again, if it's not human and it's not happy to see you, they will gladly put it down. And this continues, street by street, block by block, hab by hab. The Arbites stroll through every single public area in the underhive, level by level, killing everything that doesn't fit the very, very specific criteria of happy to see you and completely human. Hundreds of bodies pile up over this period, but since it's in discrete areas and the individuals are very often, well, shut out from normal society, it doesn't really matter all much to the Arbites, and the majority of people are still hiding within their homes and their habs as they should be, as they've been instructed to. And then the first real problem occurs, the first firefight. Now, this is an ominous warning. Not so much the fact that they run across an armed gang who happen to fire back at them, but it's also a genuine warning. What the Arbites come across is best described as the fallout or the remnants of an actual battle in the underhive that occurred before they got there. Now, it's very difficult to figure out what the hell happened because it's an absolute mess. Right above the junction that we're going to talk about, Junction 801, there is a conflict, a firefight that has occurred before the Arbites get there, and they come across the very tail end of it. Roughly a group of 50 armed gangsters are catching their breath after a surprise attack from a group of armed civilians. Now, armed civilians are odd within the underhive, but they're not impossible. After all, these gangsters are, in their own rights, armed civilians. However, as much as these gangers were clearly fighting over something else, and there are a lot of dead civilians as well as dead gangers in this junction way, the Arbites don't see the obvious warning that something bigger is afoot, and that if these gangsters, who are regularly known for trying to protect their local community or their turf, if they're at war with something, that certainly indicates that whatever it is a danger to the Arbites, theoretically. However, this warning completely fails to dissuade the Arbites, who simply open fire on the gangsters and force them to flee deeper into the underhive, specifically towards Junction 801. Now, the Arbites, as a result of this, break up even further into small squads of 5 and begin to try and track down these gangsters and put them out of their misery, traipsing by the dozens or even a half a hundred bodies that have been left as the wake of this initial firefight and the warning that they are ignoring. So, they finally reach 801 Junction Gate. Now, 801 Junction Gate is like a lot of different locations in the underhive. It is seedy, it is disreputable, it is absolutely pitch black dark, and it is oddly quiet. We are now several levels deep into the underhive, and with the cull beginning at 9 p.m. and the Arbites making fairly good clips, it only takes them about an hour to reach the junction gate. Now again, like many areas in the underhive, it has sectioning off and areas that are used to determine where or where not public people are allowed to go, and essentially restrictions to travel. But Junction Gate 801 is a specific entrance to a residential neighborhood, where there are several multi-level hab blocks designed to house tens of thousands of people in a very, very small area. The Arbites, tracking down those gangsters from earlier, have entered the junction gate, opening up its security entrance and flooding into the local hab areas to try and determine where their quarries have gone. So by 9:55 p.m., as the cull began at 9 p.m., the Arbites bypass 4 street junctions at this point, going downward and maintaining communication until the first group reaches 801 Junction Gate. Now, this first group is several squads, and 5 minutes later, the first squad in the stack goes quiet at the junction gate. Now, a Imperial squad of Arbites going quiet is abnormal. This is a cull. You're supposed to maintain consistent, constant, every 5 minutes you check in, and every minute you're supposed to have at least some sound over the airways so that people are aware of any concerning problems. For an entire team, a squad of 5, to simply go black in the middle of the time is an indicator that something negative has happened. As a result, 5 neighboring teams converge to investigate. On this map, each group of Arbites is represented by a single individual here. They are squads of 3 to 5, basically. And these teams converge into the center of this neighborhood at the 801 Junction Gate. 7 minutes later, they arrive all together at the entryway, and they begin kicking in doors. Now, unbeknownst to them, they are being watched. That first squad of 5 Arbites didn't just go missing. They're still here, they're just not necessarily in control of their faculties anymore. Several of them are actually looking at their former allies right now. And that group of Arbites are basically standing in an alleyway a few meters away from the junction gate. They're just not, or sorry, they're well hidden enough that the Arbites don't notice them. But theirs are not the only set of eyes watching the Arbites. From 6 of the hab blocks, there are hundreds of yellow and different colored eyes looking down at this squad of roughly 20 Arbites. Now, it is very rare that the Arbites come across a foe as insidious as true gene stealers. And though they are technically prepared for it, unbeknownst to them, they've walked into quite the mess. They have actually managed to infiltrate, quote unquote, more accurately, they've been led into the main hive of a small cell of gene stealers. Now, these cultists include a lot of armed civilians, some of whom had been fighting with the gangsters earlier, who'd been trying to break into the hab to get loved ones out. That conflict forced the gangsters to leave, and if the Arbites had taken a few minutes to pay attention to those bodies, they would have noticed that some of them were leaking purplish blood instead of red. So, the eyes look down at the Arbites. 3 minutes later, as the Arbites start kicking in doors, the 50 of them come under direct fire from 2 previously cleared rooms and the next street over. Now, that next street over, that alleyway, is where the other Arbites have gone, and they now level their shotguns on the closest squad and open fire upon them. About half of the group of 50, so 25-ish of the Arbites, are stuck forward of the first 2 habs, having broken in the doors, identified only civilians, so they think. In reality, they are infected gene stealers, and then moving onward, while the rest of them have pressed even further up into these 2 northern hab sectors. The other 25 make a line across the entrance to the 801 junction gate, and they begin trading fire with the infected Arbites, both in that side street and also with this hab block in the distance. The fire coming from that hab block is a mix of pistols and also several stub and auto weapons being fired from upper windows. And the direct fire is pretty sporadic. It's only a couple of parasite-infected civilians and several high-caliber stubbers from a certain 3-armed individual who is leading the cultists in that house. However, it only takes about 18 minutes for this to suddenly get considerably worse. All 4 of these hab blocks empty, and dozens, and then hundreds, and then well over 1,000 pure strain and infected gene stealers pour into the 801 junction gate. A running fight begins between seemingly mad civilians, led by a Kellermorph on one side, the Magus, a Magus, who is controlling the overall battle on the other side, the infected Arbites in one of the alleyways, and the rest of the Arbites. This is absolutely horrifying. Imagine in a series of images like you would see out of Space Hulk Deathwing, where hundreds of pure strain are pouring out of an area, backed up by well over 1,000 infected civilians. You can barely even see the hooded and cloaked Magus and Kellermorph in the sheer mass of all of these enemies. There are only 50 Arbites, and most of them are split up in the main junctionway gate. A couple of lightning blasts, a few very well-aimed pistol shots from the Kellermorph, and these 2 frontal squads are basically cut down to a man, and there will be nothing left of them. They'll simply be shredded apart as more and more pure strain pour over the position and start threatening the other groups of Arbites. However, the Arbites are well equipped for this. They have massive shotguns. Each round from their weapons, at least as long as they're fired within 30 to 50 feet, are able to down even a pure strain gene stealer, much less the infected civilians. The problem is, they're not dealing with small groups of gene stealers or civilians. They're dealing with 10 to 15 times their number in this single area, and their enemies are coming from all directions, not to mention that they're getting shot at. So they're having to keep themselves in cover and reload their relatively bulky, relatively heavy shotguns that hold only 5 to 6 rounds apiece. That means that while each Arbites is able to give a good accounting of himself, they're only able to hold so many choke points, like these 2 doorways to the Habs, before they are simply overwhelmed by gene stealers and infected humans throwing themselves at the doorway, or, in a couple of cases, climbing down from the roof and leaping onto the Arbites. Once the Gene Stealer pure strains get in close, it's not even a fight anymore. The Arbites rarely have any melee weapons apart from stun batons, and while those are quite effective against the infected humans, they are of limited effectiveness against the pure strain, who simply shred the Arbites' armor with their massive claws, rip their throats out, and absolutely jump onto the next one, like some sort of horrifying insectoid shredder, effectively. They're like a blender with 4 arms covered in fish hooks. And that's not even to remind you that there is a Kellermorph and a Magus in this battle as well, meaning that these Gene Stealers are not undirected, they are actively being psychically dominated by the will of the Magus, and by extension, theoretically, somewhere, the will of a Patriarch or a Broodmaster. This means that the fight does not last long. Between the first door being blasted open and the first fire being returned, it only takes a little bit under 20 minutes for half of the entire squads to be lost in this conflict. They are run right over, practically shredded, and even though the Arbites who manage to run are able to shut the junction gate, it's only a matter of seconds before the Gene Stealer pure strains climb their way out of the 801 junction and begin chasing the Arbites through the streets in hordes. Now, the infected have a much harder time of doing this, as they are human and are not nearly as mobile or driven as the pure strain. But, with the effective use of the Gene Stealer's intelligence, they're able to reopen the junction gate, freeing this infected horde to roam about the city. This leads to the end of the cull. Suddenly uncovering a mass of Gene Stealers is definitely a reason for the Arbites to rethink going down in small squads into the underhive. However, the trap is already sprung. Now, it is worthy of note that this is not exactly what the Gene Stealers want. They certainly don't want to have humans suddenly appearing within their controlled area, where they've infected all of the local civilians, and where they keep a lot of their pure strain, who are very important for the health of and protection of the Broodmaster or Patriarch, not to mention that they're also very important for infection and spreading of vectors. They're also an indication that, okay, it's definitely 100% Gene Stealers, and not some sort of chaos uprising or an uprising of civilians anymore. No, now the Arbites, and by extension the rest of the planet, knows, uh-oh, Gene Stealers do be here. There's a problem, there's an infection, a plague spreading, and the Imperium has known about Gene Stealers for a very long time, and they know that they are a problem. So the Gene Stealers have accidentally outed themselves, and they're going to do their best to get rid of the evidence. Now, the evidence in this case is about half of all of the Arbites squads. Over the period of the next, basically, half hour, until the Arbites manage to flee all the way out of the Underhive and shut it down and section it off. So now it's not just a curfew, we're not just closing you up in the Underhive. Every hab, every building, every business that the Administratum and the Hive has access to is going to be shut and locked permanently, with an alarm sounding and a consistent, pathogen warning set up so that people know Gene Stealer infection afoot, things are going to be put on lockdown, and that leaves the Gene Stealers effectively having to make the difficult decisions now. So, ball's in their court. The Underhive of Movis is locked down. They're aware that it's Gene Stealers. However, 500 or more Arbites have been lost in their rapid and frenetic fleeing back into the upper levels of the Hive, and they think that they have contained the problem for now. Or at least that perhaps the Gene Stealers will be slowed down by their closing of the Underhive. It's too late. There is gripping terror in the Spire. As of that evening, there had not been much of a concern in the upper hive of Movis. There was basically no reason to worry about civilian rioters or even about food insecurity, But something has changed. The mushroom hive has its own astropathic chamber, and at the announcement that gene stealers are there, they move to begin basically broadcasting to the rest of the Imperium and to the other hives the news that there have been gene stealers discovered in large numbers in Movis's underhive. Again, the Arbites can't give exact numbers, but it was at least a couple of hundred, and possibly over 1,000 infected individuals and other gene stealers, and the higher order organisms that were able to use psychic powers were also recognized. However, after the ending of the cull, the astropaths move to their chamber at the top of one of the spires of Movis. Again, mushroom hive, it's got multiple spires. And they move up there, they get ready to send out the message and get the information going. They get right to starting, and then the power cuts out. Not for the entire hive, not even for the entire block. Just that spire. The spire where the astropaths are trying to use their psychic powers to call out to the rest of the Imperium for help. Now, the power goes out, and that's something that the civilian workers know how to deal with. They go down to try and fix whatever's wrong, identify the problem, and the astropaths continue to attempt to signal boost using their own psychic powers and broadcast to the rest of the Imperium anyway. Their call isn't as perfect because there are electrical systems and communication systems that they need to use to improve their abilities over distance, but they can still get it out to the local sector and probably to the other hives, or easily to the other hives on the planet, and also likely to the other planets in the Glorianum sector. Also, via other ships in the area that have astropaths, they'll be able to hear them, but it won't be an Imperium or even a sector-wide call now. It's going to be limited to nearby planets and possibly also the subsector. However, this disruption is enough, and it's questionable where it came from. Around 50 PDF troopers move to a pre-designated holding position around the astropathic chamber, while the psychers inside seem to be a little distressed. They're trying to do their job, they're trying to broadcast to the rest of the Imperium, and something is just not working. It might be the power's out, it might be that there's some concern about gene stealers in general, but these 50 PDF troops are well trained to do this. They are guards extraordinaire in their own mindsets, and of course they are very capable of standing in a hallway and looking tough with autoguns. But the astropath's distress is not traceable to some esoteric concept or to the power being out. It's something much, much worse. In the darkness, the shadow of fear starts creeping, waiting to strike. Now, it would be very interesting to go into how exactly a lictor got into Hive Movis. It would be even more interesting, in fact, to consider what type of lictor knows well enough to cut the power to the astropathic chambers, and then to sneak his way up into the area where the PDF are guarding the chambers. But that's not much of a concern to the PDF when 8 luminous yellow eyes appear to be invisibly hanging about 8.5 feet off the ground at the end of the hallway. One trooper walks down to try and identify what these tiny lights are, thinking that it might be some sort of servitor that he just can't see in the darkness, and all of a sudden he stops moving. There's a slight distortion in the air for a fraction of a second, a little gust of wind, and he just stops moving, standing straight up, his eyes pointed at the ceiling, and then he slumps over. There's a hole straight through the bottom of his jaw, poking out one of his eyes. It only takes a fraction of a second for the rest of the PDF troopers to realize he's dead. But in that fraction of a second, the air where he had been standing ripples, and the long, curved tentacles humped back, and the massive domed armor, and the swinging, pendulous, impaling tendrils of the lictor appear. They don't have time to shoot. They don't even have time to scream. They barely have an opportunity to fire blindly into the darkness before more and more and more of them start going the way of that first inquisitive PDF trooper. And it also doesn't take long before they realize that what they're up against, they have no chance of killing whatsoever. The lictor shreds through 50 PDF troopers as if they're barely even there. With each swipe and swing of its massive arm and back claws, it kills or disembowels at least 2 men. Its tentacles are able to wrap around and break the arms and necks of several soldiers at a time, and within fractions of a second, the same amount of time that it takes for men to take aim, it has already blown through enough troopers that those who realize that it's hopeless start running. They don't make it very far. Down about a 75-yard hallway to the room where the astropaths are trying to scream into the void, the lictor simply stalks, walking calmly and with no hurry as it hurls the last of the dead PDF troopers away from itself, and the first of the alarms begin to sound. It has let only a couple of men escape, not so that they can go and sound an alarm, but rather so that its presence is known, at least in part, to the Imperials. It is the Shadow of Fear. It is a designate creature of the hive mind, and it has no intention of letting its impressive feat and its sneaky actions go unnoticed for their psychological warfare effects. However, he has a job to do. And so he pops open the door to the astropathic choir room, he fades back into invisibility, and the slaughter begins again. Now, the astropaths are capable as psychers, and they do have the ability to at least partially sense the absence or the dangerous shadow in the warp that the lictor exudes. He isn't strong enough on his own that he can simply block out their psychic powers. However, he is able to cause the sensation of fear, and as much as they can track that he is there, they can't see him. Their lack of eyes and their ability to see warp creatures and other people by their souls make it a little bit difficult to tell what a lictor is, and that couple of seconds of confused panic is all that he needs to slaughter the half a dozen or more top astropaths in the room, and then he proceeds to absolutely butcher the rest of the astropathic choir and the astropathic staff, leaving the entirety of the upper level of the spire an absolute charnel house mess. Lictors don't kill cleanly, and they don't kill softly. They shred, they rip, they impale, they tear, and they devour. And the astropaths are left in absolute tatters. So, Hive Movis, for the moment, is silenced. Its astropaths, if not its Vox network, are knocked out, though the power will be resupplied after a short period of time. All the lictor really did was go down and rip out some circuit boards on the lower level, but he is definitely going to get away with it, and knowing that he's in the hive could be practically as terrifying, if not more terrifying, than the information that there are gene stealers on the lower level, not to mention that he is loose within the upper hive and able to access some of the spires. So that's going to be real fun to deal with, but it is another asset for those gene stealer cultists. And that is where we will end this one. So, what happens next? We have the gene stealers unfortunately forced to out themselves during the cull. They've killed off quite a few Arbites within Hive Movis, and they've caused some chaos, and their most important, or second most important asset, their cult lictor, has broken into the astropathic chambers and basically alpha strike pre-killed all of the people who could make any continued communications with the Imperium, at least within the hive itself. What are their next choices? What are the next options? Where are they going to go with this? All things that you'll have to add in the comments, and of course, there will be votes up on this as well. Sorry this video has taken so long. I know it's been a while, and I know that this is kind of a different thing. This is still an experimental series. We're working on stuff. But I'm glad I could get it out to you. This is a part 1. The part 2 will be what we talked about last time, the PDF at the mines. I wanted to keep these a little bit more short so they were more edible for people, as they are a narrative series, and I don't want them to just become super long to the point where people can't enjoy them. But other than that, my recommendation that you go vote and that you enjoy this video. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. I wish you good luck and a good night.